courtroom buzzed with a low hum, the sound of murmured conversations, shuffled papers, and tapping shoes on the marble floor. It was just another ordinary morning in the halls of justice. Another case, another forgotten person, another name lost in the system. But today something would change. The heavy doors creaked open, and a frail, weathered figure shuffled in. His shoes were worn, soles barely holding together. His suit, once crisp and formal, was now faded and threadbare. His eyes were distant, lost somewhere far beyond the cold walls of the courthouse. This was the kind of man people ignored. An old black man, homeless and broken, carrying nothing but his dignity and the burden of being unseen. As he walked toward the defendant's table, the murmurs in the room quieted. They didn't know who he was, but they all knew what they assumed him to be. Another discarded soul who had fallen through the cracks. Another statistic. But there was something in his gaze. Something different. Even though he looked like just another old man, a relic of a past long gone, there was a quiet strength in him that made the air around him feel heavier. Judge Malcolm Turner, a man whose arrogance had been honed over decades of easy judgments, glanced up briefly, but not long enough to truly see the man standing before him. He smirked. This was just another routine case to him. He barely glanced at the man in front of him, his gaze dismissive. The prosecutor wasn't paying attention either. She had already written this case off as just another waste of time. This man was nothing more than a homeless nuisance. They had all seen enough cases like his to know how they would unfold. But before we continue, if you believe in stories that challenge the system and reveal the power of truth, make sure to like this video, comment where you're watching us from, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, and it helps us share more impactful stories like this. Now let's get back to the story. Case number 456C, State versus Marcus Holt. The bailiff's voice echoed through the room, sharp and official. Charge, public disturbance, trespassing on city property, the judge said, tapping his pen on the bench as he looked down at the paper. His tone was flat and indifferent. He didn't look at the man. He didn't need to. You're wasting our time, Mr. Holt. The man, Marcus Holt, stood with his head slightly bowed. His face was lined with years of hardship, his hands trembling lightly, but his eyes held something else. Something that no one in that courtroom could quite place. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't begging for mercy. He wasn't pleading for understanding. He simply stood there, like a figure carved from stone, unmoving. Judge Turner's eyes flicked up, but only briefly. His smirk widened. "What, are you here to make a scene?" he said, letting the words drip with mockery. "You know, you're not the first to come through these doors with a sob story. What makes you different?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, silent, unmoving. The tension in the room grew, but Marcus remained as still as a rock in a river, unable to be moved. The judge let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "I've heard it all before, Mr. Holt. And honestly, I don't have time for more of your nonsense." For a moment, Marcus remained quiet, his hands folded together gently in front of him. His head slightly bent, as though absorbing the weight of the judge's words. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "I wasn't making a scene, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the courtroom, startling in its clarity. "I was sitting on a bench that used to be mine." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one knew how to respond. The judge scoffed, clearly unimpressed. He shifted his position, a slight smirk creeping across his face. "Nostalgia doesn't make it legal," Judge Turner said. "You're trespassing. This city's tired of people like you squatting in places no one wants." Marcus raised his head slightly. His gaze didn't waver. He wasn't angry. There was no fire in his eyes. But there was something steady, something quiet that seemed to hold the room at bay. "You think the city doesn't want me?" Marcus said, his voice quiet but piercing. "The city forgot me a long time ago. You think a judge like you sees a man like me? You don't. But I'm still here. And I'll be here, even if you don't see me." The courtroom fell into a silence so thick it seemed to swallow the room. A subtle shift occurred, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Everyone in the room, from the prosecutor to the clerk, began to sense it, the weight of this man's words. The judge's face faltered for a split second. He didn't like that. He had expected resistance, anger, plea for mercy. But this man had no fear in his eyes. His words weren't begging for understanding. His words were simply a fact. He was there whether they liked it or not. "I don't have time for your stories, Mr. Holt," Judge Turner snapped, his voice strained, trying to regain control. "You're here because you broke the law, and that's all I need to know." But Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't respond. He simply stood there, as still as ever, waiting for the next words to fall from the judge's lips. The prosecutor, who had her pen poised in the air, looked up briefly, unsure whether to continue writing or to pay attention to this man who had clearly defied all expectations. It was at that moment that something changed. A subtle shift in the room. A change that could be felt in the air, like a storm rolling in from the horizon. People began to whisper softly, as if they could sense something coming, something important, but they didn't know what. And then, without warning, the doors of the courtroom swung open. The doors of the courtroom swung open with a force that made everyone stop in their tracks. A tall, commanding figure stepped into the room. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. Her suit was sharp and polished, each movement she made radiating confidence. She was young, but her presence filled the room like a tidal wave, demanding respect without saying a word. She walked toward the front of the courtroom, and everyone's eyes followed her. Even the judge, who had been so sure of himself moments ago, stiffened in his seat. "Who was this woman?" "Your Honor," the woman said, her voice calm, controlled, yet powerful. "Before you make a decision in this case, I suggest you take a look at this." The judge glanced at her, clearly surprised, but the woman didn't wait for an invitation. She moved swiftly toward the bench, placing a thick folder onto it. The sound of the folder hitting the wood echoed louder than any gavel, sending a ripple through the courtroom. The judge glanced down at the folder with a furrowed brow, clearly annoyed, but his annoyance quickly turned to confusion as he flipped it open. The pages inside were filled with legal documents. Deeds, titles, military service records, certificates of honor, and one name that would make anyone in that room stop and pay attention. Marcus Holt. Judge Turner's eyes widened as he scanned the documents, each word sinking deeper into the weight of his assumptions. His smug expression melted away as he processed the information. Marcus Holt wasn't just some homeless man. He wasn't just a forgotten soul drifting through life. No, Marcus Holt had been a soldier, a war hero who had served his country with distinction. He had helped build the city, laying down the very foundations that others took for granted. And that building on Hollow Street, the one the judge had assumed was abandoned, it had once belonged to Marcus Holt. The realization hit like a freight train. The man standing before him wasn't just a homeless man. He was a cornerstone of the city's history, a man whose contributions had been erased, whose value had been discarded because of the color of his skin and the state of his life now. For the first time that day, Judge Turner's confidence wavered. He didn't know what to say. The weight of his own ignorance pressed down on him, suffocating him. The room was silent, almost reverent, as Marcus Holt stood, his pride intact, his legacy reclaimed. The woman, Rachel Holt, Marcus's daughter, stood beside him, silent yet powerful. Her presence in the room was undeniable. The legal documents she just placed before the judge were a testament to Marcus's life. A life that had been far more significant than any of them had known. She had come to correct the records, to give back the dignity that had been stolen from her father. "Your Honor," Rachel said, her voice steady and controlled, "before you make a final decision, I believe this case deserves to be revisited." Judge Turner opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind raced, processing the weight of what he had just learned. He didn't want to believe it, but the truth was undeniable. Rachel stood tall beside her father, unwavering in her determination. She had fought for justice before, But today felt different. Today it wasn't just about law or legalities. Today was about her father's dignity, about ensuring that the man who had built this city, who had served his country with honor, was not reduced to a forgotten relic. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her mere presence in that room was enough to command attention. And when the judge finally spoke, his voice faltered. "Mr. Holt, Judge Turner began, but his words trailed off. He couldn't find the right ones. He had been wrong. He had failed to see what Marcus Holt truly represented. The system had failed him, and now it was clear. Marcus was no longer invisible. His silence spoke volumes. His legacy was undeniable. The room was still. People waited for the next word to come from the judge. But this time, no one was rushing to speak. Marcus Holt wasn't just a name on a paper anymore. He was a man with a history that no one could ignore. Judge Turner cleared his throat and, with a shaky hand, reached for the papers in front of him. "In light of this new evidence," he began, his voice strained, "the charges against Mr. Holt are hereby dismissed. All charges are vacated." The gavel fell, but it was a hollow sound, lacking the usual authority. The courtroom was quiet, almost reverent, as Marcus Holt stood, his pride intact, his legacy reclaimed. The system had tried to erase him, but Marcus Holt, standing there with his daughter at his side, had proven that no one could ever erase the legacy of a man who had truly lived. The world may have forgotten him, but in that courtroom, Marcus had reminded everyone of his worth. As Marcus and Rachel stood, their heads held high, the room remained frozen in that moment, as though time itself had stopped to bear witness to the truth. The city may have tried to forget Marcus Holt, but his dignity, his legacy, would never be erased. He wasn't just a homeless man. He was a hero, a pillar of the city, and the world would remember his name,